Are you struggling to create an intentional headspace? Unable to connect deeper with yourself? Come, and together, let's address the elephant in the room. I'm your host, Sinead Roche, and this is the Uncomfortable Podcast. Has anyone heard the term of unconditional love? Like, I have all this unconditional love for you, meaning you can do whatever you want. Well, you can behave in any regard, any action you want to do, go for it. You can say whatever, and I'm still gonna have all this love for you. You know, that's what it means to have unconditional love. Unconditional love is not something that is just like as poetic as it sounds, because like I feel like also like in most like I don't know like wedding vows and everything, people are saying like, yeah, with all this unconditional love that I have for you, I'm gonna continue to love you throughout. No, no, no. Let's not have unconditional love for people. I know it sounds cynical, but let's have conditions. Let's have boundaries. Let's have standards. Let's have requirements. Let's have, you need to be doing this in order to fulfill this for me. And that's not saying that love now becomes what you can do for a person, but it does mean, are you being considerate towards me? I want your actions to be considerate towards me. I don't want you just behaving in some sort of way because for me, that doesn't necessarily mean you love or like or care about me in any regard, right? Which is why I want to talk to you guys today about the difference between attachment and connection. Connection, yes, is usually equated to love, but it's not necessarily just about like romantic love. It's just about like emotional connection and versus attachment, which is having to do with like dependency and someone else helping you cope with your insecurities, but in kind of a toxic way because you become dependent on these people. And yeah, let's talk about it. First of all, whenever we meet people, we have to kind of assess, okay, first of all, is everything kind of aligning? Do we think, it doesn't have to be think alike, but are we just like, just meshing together? Like, is it a vibe or is it not a vibe? Right? The problem is that certain people, and we'll get into which types of people and why, certain people don't form connections. They usually form attachments. This comes from the fact that they might idolize this person, and because they idolize this person, they want to get close to these people. And so within that attachment that they build, first of all, because they've formed that kind of like I've talked about this before, but like that superiority and inferiority complex, they're kind of like limiting how close they can get to this person because they're like, oh, this person is so high up here and everything like that. But not only that, they're putting kind of clauses and conditions on themselves on how to act and behave in order to get closer to this person. Because there is the chance that certain people who we do idolize or do want to become friends with, right, we might just not click and it might just not work out. But because we wanted to become friends with them for so long, or we have just this great need or whatever, we kind of force it, right? And with that force comes attachment because you're kind of attaching to that idea of them. And likewise, because like you're not allowing them to have an actual connection with you, they're kind of also attaching to this idea that you have portrayed of yourself. Let's get into what attachment and connection really looks like. What's the difference between them? Okay, so as I said, attachment kind of comes with clauses and conditions, and emotional connection is freeing. It doesn't have expectations, right? And when you have a connection with a person, it means that your happiness is on you, their happiness is on them. When you have an attachment with someone, usually the person who is insecure, and sometimes it's both people being insecure, is you are putting your happiness on them. So you believe that they have to make you happy and in order for you to have kind of happiness. Another way to see this is that it is codependency versus support. Someone who's attached to another person is like, you kind of like, it's kind of like having like your hand held. Like, I need you to hold my hand throughout the entire process of everything, versus someone who's supporting you is like, okay, I'm gonna be hands off on this, but when you need me, like, I'm here for you, kind of. And in some cases, yeah, support can also be like, you need my hand to be held, but that means like in that situation where like support is hand holding or like just coddling and guiding through, what's it called? Attachment is like a big deeper and a bit bigger of an issue, because it's like, I need you here constantly at all times. You know, I can't do anything without you. I don't function properly without you. I can't think properly without you. You know, if I don't hear from you within like 10 minutes of texting you, then I'm like, you don't like me, stuff like this, or like, that I can't do what I need to get done because everything is dependent on you, because I formed such a big attachment to this person. Yeah. So that's kind of like the difference between attachment and connection. And the reason why attachment, we don't want to attach to people, is first of all, people can always leave. That's a big thing. Another reason is attachment is temporary, you know. Attachment is not going to get you through hard times in any relationship, friendship, any situation, because you're just attaching to a version of them and you're not actually connecting with them as a person. And when I think of connection, just from like my own personal point of view, I think of connection as like, I'm connecting not only with who they are presently, but I've also connected with who they are from the past. And I'm also seeing through and wanting to connect with who they are in the future. But however, if it seems like our futures aren't going to align in some sort of way, I'm perhaps not going to be able to connect with them that well, and that's okay, because I'm connecting them in this present kind of state of mind. But I've also gotten to know them through connecting with their past. But that doesn't mean you hold their past against them or anything like that. It's just like, hey, I've gotten to know you, like, I've heard about your stories, stuff like this. It's not about just idolizing what you can do in the future. You know, it's about past, the present, and then seeing, hey, let's walk along side by side. If this doesn't work out, that's okay, but we've connected here. Small things like this. And when you're connecting with someone, it's not that you become like, yeah, you do make time for another person, right? And like, when you meet anyone, it's like, you do have to make time for that person. But it's not that like you're putting this person ahead of your other, like, perhaps obligations, perhaps your other friendships necessarily. It's kind of just like adding this person in, and you're not making your entire life revolve around this person, which is in comparison to attachment. Attachment is like, this person says to jump, I'm gonna jump as high as I can. This person says walk, I'm gonna run, you know, stuff like this. Like, I'm gonna go the extra mile for this person. And you can do that with connection as well. But it's not about them. It's not about your entire life revolving around them and you being really dependent on them. Especially when it comes to relationships, like, you're not dependent on them completely to be able to function or do something properly during the day. So let's talk about why some of us get into attachments versus connections. So this has to do with attachment theory, and I told you guys before that I was going to talk about this at one point a bit more in depth. So attachment theory is practically, it believes that the connections and romantic relationships that you're going to have in your adulthood are often already predetermined and influenced by the attachment styles in our childhood. And the attachment styles that they're specifically looking at are the ones between you when you're a kid and your caregivers, like your parents, grandparents, anyone who's older than you, someone's taking care of you. Now, there are supposedly 4 different attachment styles. They kind of vary in a sense. But yeah, let's go through them. So the first one is secure. Secure attachment. First of all, I don't think I've ever, I just want to say, I don't think I've ever met someone who's completely secure in their attachment styles. And I just think that's because, like, caregivers mess up. We usually have traumatic childhoods, or we haven't yet fully become secure. I believe I've met people who have become secure or are on their way to becoming secure, but I don't think I've met someone who's just like grown up completely secure. Which maybe I need to change the people I'm around. Probably that, but like, I don't know. The people I'm around is great, but like, yeah. I think they may be rare. But anyways, secure attachment styles are people, it's when basically like the caregivers have allowed room for exploration. So like being alone or being with the family while providing a secure base for them. So it's kind of like you're really, as the name suggests, you're just really secure in the fact that your relationship is solid. So like if you needed attention, you got attention, but you were also allowed to be independent. If you needed support, you got that type of support, right? You had your boundaries, you had expectations, all these types of things. Then there's the fear. Then there's the ambivalent. So the anxious attachment ones. I myself am one of those. And it's when kind of like the caregivers are not necessarily consistent, And you're gonna see like someone who has this type of attachment style when they're growing up, it's kind of like they're afraid of being abandoned, and that's why like you're usually chasing after people. And I feel like these people like you're mostly really insecure about the fact that like you don't know if you're worthy of love. You don't know if you deserve more than this, so you might be staying in something that's not necessarily best for you, things like this. Then there is the fearful avoidant. And that's when like when you were a child, like you were shown kind of like low affection, and also when the affection was shown to you though, you also weren't like that reciprocative of it. Um, and what that looks like when you're growing up is that like you might seem like an available person, but in reality, when people come too close to you, you kind of push them away because you're afraid that they're gonna find out that you're not worthy of being loved and that you're not as great as you seem. Things like this. Right. Then there is dismissive avoidant. They are highly independent people. They have grown up to be highly independent. And in relationships, they're kind of like really distant, right? They're not emotionally available. And these people actually they don't try to get into relationships most of the time because it requires them to become emotionally available. And they're very, as I said, they're very dismissive and everything. And what's it called? They tend to take like do lots of like superficial relationships, like hookups, stuff like this. That's mostly like their type of area because they don't want to become that intimate with another person. And that's, yeah, this has to do also like with how they were raised and their caregivers. So basically, that's why certain people are able to connect versus why certain people are able to attach. And yes, obviously there's work that can be done, and I'm going to talk to you guys about like how we can kind of avoid attachment. Um, but more than that, like it's not just about like how you're growing up, but also like what have you been doing, which type of people have you been around. So you might have in the past been around like a lot of people who were secure attachments, which have like also improved how you become like securely attached in a relationship. So they've shown you how to like do your put your boundaries up, things like this, right? Or you could have been around a lot of people who are like dismissive and avoidant, and so you don't might not feel the need to open up as much, and I don't know, you're just not like necessarily prone to going into like deep and intimate relationship. It's just not something that you want to do. And so like what I'm saying by this is that yes, you could have grown up with a certain attachment style, but also the people who you've surrounded yourself with, the environment that you've grown up in as well, and also the friendships that you've curated from that also have a huge impact on how your attachment style continues. Because just because you had one attachment style growing up doesn't mean it has to be the same throughout, because like a lot of different events can happen. I don't know, someone can betray you as someone who's secure, and then you might become an insecure person, and you might become anxious that someone is always going to be, looking for the next best thing. Things like this can happen, right? So it's constantly evolving, which means that you constantly have to kind of work on your attachment style or the way you connect with people. For some reason, I don't like the fact that they say attachment, like secure attachment, even though like the entire thing is about like attachment theories, because it's secure connection in that sense because you're having secure connections with people. But regardless, that's not really necessary. Okay, let's get into how we can kind of avoid these attachments. So first of all, know your patterns. Know what your attachment style is. I am avoidant. I'm sorry. I'm an anxious attachment person. So that means if I'm trying to what's it called, to get into a relationship with someone, I need to know that certain things are going to trigger me really easily. And I do want to be around my person like constantly, probably. That means boundaries, and knowing that that is the type of person I am. And also knowing the reasons why that is. Like, I don't know, I grew up in a great home. My parents are very loving and caring. I just think it was like maybe it didn't have enough attention at times, like but that's not anyone's fault now. It's just like I have to be responsible for how I move with that in mind. And don't just know your own attachment style, but also know your partner's attachment styles. And this is when you're gonna have that kind of conversation of, hey, listen, these are my boundaries. What are your boundaries? Not only that, like, it's not just about boundaries for yourself and setting those up, and also setting those up for your partners, but it's also about knowing like the emotional needs that you have. Like for me, also going on with this is like triggers, right? For me, something that's gonna really trigger me, and is kind of an emotional need for me is constant communication. So something that triggers me is that like I'm not talking to the person I'm seeing, perhaps like after like 2 days. Like after 2 days of no contact, I'm gonna become very anxious. It's just something that I'm just like that, right? I can regulate myself and I can tell myself, hey, listen, Sinead, like it's okay, probably nothing's wrong, right? But for me, that means I one of my emotional needs is constant communication in the sense that like if you need 2 days away or like you can't talk to me for 2 days, I'd be really appreciative of the fact that like you inform me beforehand, right? And that's not someone who's like necessarily playing onto her insecurities and saying like just letting them be, right? But it's just like taking that into consideration. Hey, listen, like I feel this way when this happens. Could you maybe tell me this like beforehand? Certain things like this. Because the thing is, when you have these attachment styles, you get triggered so easily by small things, perhaps. And if you're highly sensitive, like myself, then it is important to be able to regulate within yourself. But it's also important to establish, hey, listen, I need this from you. Otherwise, this might not work out because this is how I feel. And someone who is going to be considerate about you and wanting to form a connection with you, not just an attachment, is going to understand that. And specifically from like my attachment point of view, like coming from an anxious attachment, I think we are prone to like just being in toxic situations and being like submissive in toxic situations because it's like the constant dopamine and oxytocin, like so dopamine is like that feel good feeling and oxytocin is like the trust. And so like when those levels fluctuate continuously, you're kind of just like, because you're insecure, it's again it's triggering something, but you're also like really not likely to like leave that situation. So already pre going into anything, like having those boundaries kind of set, and being really aware when things are going off in your head, when this might be like hinting at a recurring pattern that you've had in the past. That's really important to be able to take yourself out of situation before you gain an attachment that's really strong, and then you sort of like attach your value to that attachment or like your self-worth to that attachment, right? So that's just like an example of like, be aware of the triggers that may be happening, what you kind of need from that relationship, the boundaries that you be having. That's another thing. Sorry, that's another thing. Like looking at the boundaries that you have for yourself, like that could literally mean I'm not gonna text a person 10 times in a row just because I might feel a certain type of way. Let me text them maybe 2, 3 times, something like this, right? Not because I don't care, but because I don't need to worry as much and know that I can have a conversation next. Something like this, just like having small reminders for yourself that listen, you don't need to do 100% the most because you're scared of something, right? And now looking at someone from, because I know I talk a lot about like being anxious attachment, but just looking also at someone who is perhaps like avoidant, right? The moment you feel like you want to kind of like push someone away, why don't you like pause, ask yourself what's happening right now that's like making it feel like it's too close, or maybe you feel like you're being coddled or smothered in some type of sense. So ask yourself what's really going on there, and then kind of force yourself to have that type of conversation and be like, hey, listen, I feel like this. Like, can we ease it up a bit? Yeah, it's just so I don't like, because I don't want to push you away, and you want to continue the connection. Now, moving on, other methods of making sure that you kind of are like going through connection and not necessarily attachment: therapy, journaling. I journal a lot. Like, I know, and I think like most people go into like their notes apps and like they like write down their emotions and stuff like this, how something might be making them feel. That's an option. And then validating yourself. Validate who you are, like validate the fact that like you might need time, or like say for example you are someone who has like low self-worth or low self-love, but you are getting into a relationship, right? That is really hard, I feel like, because if you don't have like a kind of small base at least, like jumping into it, you might automatically just attach your self-worth and self-love to how much they're responding to you and everything like that. But if you are taking the time, like, to outside of your relationship to also work on yourself and work on how you are connecting with people and how you're connecting with yourself and how you see yourself and are valuing yourself and understanding why you might behave in certain ways, and then you bring that to your relationship, I think it really improves it. The same way when it goes to like, how are you making yourself happy? Like, it can't just be that you're making yourself happy within this relationship. How are you making yourself happy outside the relationship so that your happiness is not dependent on another person? Now, so let's take a look. This is my question for you guys. Like, are your primary relationships in the past, in the present, anything like this, are they attachments or are they connections, right? And if they are currently attachments, there are things you can do to make them connections. Having that conversation, hey, listen, we need to start putting up some boundaries, right? And that's not because like you don't like this person or something like this. It's just that you realize I'm becoming a bit too dependent, and if this person cares, like something like this, then they are definitely going to take that into consideration and be like, yeah, okay, I understand that, you know? And the thing is, when you are addressing if something is an attachment, the only problem I really see is that like there's the potential that this person might not be a real connection for you, and you're going to realize that as you transition from an attachment to a connection, and that's what sucks. But if you are willing to risk that, I think it's all the better, because an attachment, it's it's like finite, and a connection is infinite. As I was saying, like that means you can continue on with like the future potentially, and an attachment is just like you're idolizing something, and it's holding you back at the same time. And for people who are listening to this podcast, I'm pretty sure like you don't want to be held back, you don't want to be holding yourself back. So make sure that the attachments and the connections that you're forming, like, make sure they're actually connections and they're not holding you back. And so if it is a loss, no, it's never actually a loss. Thank you guys so much for listening.